They gamed on their own computers. They were on the internet with their computers. They were hacking around with things. Just spent a lot of time on the computer as kids and in their teens. And so getting a job in the computer industry made a lot of sense, and it utilized a lot of skills they already had. But if you don't come from that sort of background, looking at a computer like this can be really intimidating. And I built my first computer in high school. I was really into video editing, and video editing is one of the most computer intensive applications besides stuff like either having a server where you're running a bunch of stuff on it, usually in a business context, or gaming. Gaming is another huge way that a lot of people learn computers when they're younger. So I had that experience, and I wanted to create this course because learning how to program, a lot of times you don't need to understand the hardware, but it helps a lot to just get more comfortable with it. And it turns out that a computer inside is really not that complicated. It's kind of the same if somebody's never stepped into a kitchen before. They step into the kitchen for the first time and they're like, what are all these appliances? What are all these things? But you're going to learn that a computer is actually not that complicated. There aren't that many different things going on, and all the different cables, all the different connectors, looking at this motherboard and all the different little shiny things on it, capacitors, various plugs and inputs and outputs. There's not that much going on once you understand it. So put together this course because if you're somebody who's never opened up a computer before, I want to create something simple that in a few hours you can go from never having seen or understood any of this stuff to really understanding what's going on and being able to look inside any computer and be like, okay, I know what that's for, I know what that's for. And also when you're coding, to be able to understand what the hardware side of it is, and if you want to interact with hardware. The Internet of Things is one of the next big things, and that's about hardware, 3D printing. In the next 5 or 10 years, the tools that used to cost tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to manufacture your own components, those are things that are becoming much more available to people that are on a budget, and even individuals and small Kickstarter-like companies. So we're seeing a lot of innovation in this area. I just think it's really important for anyone who wants to learn how to code, or even just be able to talk to other programmers. If you're a leader, if you're an entrepreneur, and you just want to be able to work with a technical person, it means a lot to understand what's going on inside a computer. And this stuff transfers over to a laptop, to an iPad, to an iPhone, Android, you name it. All this stuff has the same basic components most of the time. So understanding what goes on inside a computer, how it works, how hardware works, you marry that together with the software, and that's when you have a true understanding of how things work. So you're going to get the same treatment that you're used to in other courses in the If You Can Cook, You Can Code series, where you're going to learn all this stuff through the metaphor of a kitchen and how cooking works. So I'm excited to get started with this course, and I hope to see you inside. As always, make sure that you participate in the discussion section, introduce yourself, tell me what you're trying to learn. I can direct you through and help you find the content that's best suited for what you're trying to learn. So I look forward to seeing you in the course, and I'll see you on the other side. Let me tell you a little bit more about my story and how I got into computers, how I got into programming, and why I decided to teach this course. Most people who get into programmers and who are building their own computers, they're doing it for gaming. And gaming is something I was into, played a lot of Halo with the original Xbox, a lot of Halo 2, played online, and played some really basic computer games when I was younger. A little bit of Battlefield, my brother played a little bit of Oblivion, but it wasn't really, gaming was never a big part of my life. What was a big part of my life was filming things, making videos, and doing special effects, editing things together. I've always been fascinated by putting things together in a video format because I think it's such a powerful medium. And right as I was growing up was when really high quality video was coming down in price point to the range where anybody could afford to get into it and do some really cool stuff. So I decided I wanted to build my first computer as a video editing rig. And so that's different. There's a different set of requirements for that than for if you're building a gaming machine, because things like graphics cards aren't usually as important. And what you're more concerned with is you have to have a lot of storage because video files take up a lot of space. You need to have things backed up. And you want to have a fast processor and a lot of RAM so that you can be editing high definition footage. Each time you go a step up from standard definition to 720p, you're looking at 4 times as many pixels, even though you're just doubling the vertical dimension, doubling the horizontal. And then when you go up to 1080p, it's not quite that much, but you're going up another big step. When you get into 2K and 4K, where it's about 2,000 pixels tall, the frame, or 4,000 pixels tall, then that's a really serious amount of processing power that you need. And you also need to be able to get those, read and write those files on a hard drive quick enough that you can play it at full speed, which is either 24 or 30 frames per second. So anyways, that's what got me into caring enough to learn about all this stuff, because you can save quite a bit of money building your own computer. And I'm guessing for most of you, you're not taking this course because you want to build your own computer. And it turns out that the desktop, the demand for desktop computers in general is just going down every year because people are using tablets, they're using phones, they're using laptops. So the great thing about computers, in this case especially, is that they're big. There's a lot of room inside. There's a lot of empty space, so it's easier to film what's going on. So I got into computers because I really wanted to know how to edit videos. I want to be able to, the same kind of things that I saw in Hollywood movies, I wanted to be able to create those at home on my own computer with my own camera, or at least approach that. And just understanding how it was done and being able to do it myself, that was a real thrill. So I don't do a lot of intense video editing anymore. It's kind of a latent skill that I have, but I only use it when there's a specific project that calls for it. And I've also learned a lot of other things about video editing, like how important music and audio is, and other things in terms of cinematography and setting things up that I just didn't understand when I was younger. And those things don't have as much to do with computers. I realized that a lot of video editors get overly dependent on technology, and they want to improve their technological skills instead of focusing on all the other stuff out there that has nothing to do with video editing or special effects that happens in the camera or before the camera even starts rolling. So I know you didn't take this course to hear me talk about video editing, but that's why I got into computers. And so that's part of what I'll be bringing into this. I'm not going to be going crazy about gaming stuff and having multiple graphics cards, hooking them up together and stuff like that. But that's not a big deal. There actually aren't that many differences between building a great gaming computer and building a great video editing computer. Part of what we're going to talk about also is you may have questions about, well, when I'm buying a computer, what's more important, storage space, RAM, or processor speed, and how to think about all that. So we'll be getting into all that. This computer right here is something that's my next video editing computer. So I just finished building this, and this is taking over for the computer I built 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm going to tell you how I built it. I didn't spend a lot of money on it. I'll tell you how I chose between new and used parts, and how to think about the whole process. So if you want to build it, you can. And also, I think it's important to always be thinking entrepreneurially. So how much is each of these components worth? how does their price change over time, and what's the difference between buying certain things used and new, how to think about all that stuff. It's really important to always have an idea, whatever industry you're working with it in, about how much stuff is worth, how much stuff costs. Gives you a lot of deeper understanding about how things work and why people make the decisions they do. So that's it. That's my story. And we'll be getting, in the next session, we'll be getting into answering some of these basic questions that you probably have, or you will have once you get more into this stuff, about how the hardware side of computers work. And actually, one other thing is I volunteered, and I still do it, not as often, but I volunteered with this company that sends out, well, it's a nonprofit based in Massachusetts, and they take donated computers from companies, and usually there's something wrong with them. And so what we would do is get in these triage tents, kind of like, if you think about in the military, they have army tents for medics. So we bring in these computers, they have a problem with them, and so we take apart the computer, take out all the components, inventory them, figure out what was wrong with it, put in a new hard drive, put the Linux on it, get it to boot up, fill it with a bunch of bare bones components that are very inexpensive, but sending them out to different countries in Africa where we can set up a whole school, a whole computer center, and it's really valuable for the people over there. And there's a lot of kids that benefit and are able to learn technology through these computers. So I got a lot of experience through that, and I recommend, if you have something in your area like that, to go do that at least once or twice, because seeing a bunch of different computers and being able to generalize, kind of like a mechanic. They probably haven't seen every car that's ever been made, but because they've seen so many different cars, looked under the hood, seen underneath, they can figure out where stuff is, even if something's shaped differently, called a different name. They can figure out very quickly because they're able to generalize. So getting that experience, looking at a bunch of different computers, that'll help you generalize and really get this stuff at a deeper level. In this section, you're going to get the answers to some basic questions about how computers work and how to think about computers, what's important when you're buying a computer, what sort of stuff to look at. These are some sort of general things that are going to connect how computers work and this hardware stuff with the questions and the experiences you've already had throughout your life with computers. And maybe you never got that deeper level understanding of what's going on there. And so answering these questions is going to do that. I've got this computer right here, and you may be wondering, well, when are we going to actually talk about the stuff inside this computer? Well, we're going to get to that in the next section. So if that's something that you want to immediately jump into that, then go to the next section and then come back to this later on, because each of the videos is just lectures is labeled by the title of what question I'm answering in that video. So if you want to skip over and go directly to that, by all means, but I'm going to answer some questions here, and that may give you a better perspective of what you want to learn next. Maybe which one of those videos in the coming sections that you want to look more into. This course is different than some of the other courses in this series in the sense that it's more modular. So you can skip through and watch whatever videos look most interesting to you, and you're not going to lose much by doing that. So feel free to skip around, look at the different components. Anything that sticks out to you that looks interesting, feel free to check that out first and then come through and fill in the gaps later on. But that being said, I did put it in a chronological order that does make sense, starts with the most basic stuff and the most important things, then kind of branches out to those components of hardware that aren't as important. So if you're not leaning one way or the other, I recommend you just kind of go through it the way that I organized the course. And without further ado, let's get into the questions. The first question is, what's important when you buy a computer? And there's different uses for a computer. Sometimes you need a bunch of screens because you're doing financial trading, stuff like that, and you need a little bit of extra power for that. Sometimes you're doing video editing, you need some extra processing power for that. Sometimes you're gaming and you want extra processing power for that. And that's really like heavy lifting, where you're building, if you think about a car versus a truck, you're building more of a truck. If you think about a kitchen, you're no longer talking about an industrial, something you would put in a house. You're buying industrial equipment that's meant to take more of a beating and handle larger amounts of cooking food. So you might, instead of having 4 burners, you might have 6 or 8 burners. You might have a griddle there. Instead of having a half fridge, half freezer, it's going to be one full height fridge and then a separate full height freezer. That's sort of stuff. But for most people's uses, you're just talking about doing office work and wanting things to be really quick. And a lot of it really comes down to web browsing. So there's two different important areas. One is how fast is stuff when you have a lot of things going on. That basically means how much can you multitask? How many can you have 20 tabs open with a bunch of different videos and not have to worry about stuff lagging? How fast do programs start on your computer? How long does it take to start the computer up, put it into hibernate or sleep mode, bring it back, stuff like that. And then the other angle of it is how much storage space is there. So if you're downloading a bunch of stuff or you're recording a bunch of videos, and you just need a lot of storage space for music, for videos, for pictures. You may take a lot of uncompressed photos, raw photos. You may take a lot of high definition video. And so where do you put all that stuff? Cloud storage is pretty cheap. You can get a terabyte for $10 a month, whether it's Dropbox or Google Drive. And that's probably changing, going to change pretty soon anyways. And it's really going towards unlimited. But the point is, that's another thing for you to think about. So when you're building a computer, you have to know how much storage space do I need, where in terms of a kitchen, that would be your closet, your pantry. How much space do you need to be able to just put things away in various cabinets? How much food do you have? How much pots and pans and appliances do you want to stow away? And then the short-term thing is, if you're multitasking, you want to have a big cutting board. You want to have lots of space for you to cut things up. You want to have a big table or even a kind of bar situation where you can have tons of tables and just have tons of room and space to work on things, and also a lot of room to move around between those tables. So if you're doing a lot of multitasking, you got a lot of browser windows open, each of those is a task or a process. So in the kitchen, maybe you're working on Thanksgiving dinner. And so each of those different dishes you're putting together is a different process or a different task. And so the ability of that chef in that kitchen or that cook to go around and do a bunch of different stuff and work on things has to do with, number one, the CPU, which is the processor, the brain of the computer. You can think about that as the chef, and the chef's ability to just move around fast, do things quickly. And then the other piece of it is the short-term memory of the computer, the working memory of the computer, which is RAM, or random access memory. And you can probably see that right there. If you're wondering what this big thing is, that's just the cooling heat sink for the CPU. So CPUs get really hot, same way chef gets really hot in the kitchen, easily in an industrial kitchen or in a restaurant kitchen, over 100 degrees, especially got a lot of grilling or hot ovens in there. So things can overheat quickly, and it's really important to cool down. And you notice the chef's hat, it's got this long tube above, and in the same way, heat sinks like this they take the heat, they distribute it to these fins, these very thin pieces of metal, and then air goes through it. And there's these fans, like you can see this fan right here, that send air across. There's another fan port up here. I'm going to add a fan there. And that will either bring in cold air inside or send hot air out of the case. And so that's how you cool down a CPU. People who want to run their computers faster can do something called overclocking. And we'll talk more about that later. The question is, what's important when you're buying a computer? So having that combination of CPU and RAM is really important. If you're not doing stuff that is that intense, the RAM is going to matter more than the processor, because the RAM is keeping everything active. When there's not enough space, it has to store things on the hard drive when it runs out of space on the in RAM. And so that's what can slow things down. So you want to have a lot of RAM. So 8 gigs, 16 gigs, 32 gigs of RAM. That's a general range to think of when you're thinking about a new computer. RAM is a really smart place to invest some extra money in. Processor, having a fast processor doesn't make as much of a difference as having RAM. And you can get CPU benchmarks and compare processor to processor. So really focus on the RAM, and then just know how much storage space you need and get that storage. So if you're building a computer like this, I recommend you buy your own hard drives, because it's going to be cheaper right now in terms of cost per gigabyte. 3 gigabyte hard drives at the cheapest, but it used to be 2. Eventually it's going to be 4, then it'll be probably 5 or 6, and then it'll go to 8. So it's just a matter of time, and that's how things progress in the industry. So those are the most important things to think about. Everything else is mostly secondary. As I said, if you're gaming, then yeah, the graphics unit is going to be very important. Go online and find people who have already built computers and look at the specifications they use. Make sure that if you're building from scratch, the motherboard you're using is compatible with all the components. So there's this site called PC Part Picker that'll test that and make sure that everything is compatible for you. But those are really the most important things, figuring that stuff out, and just knowing how to spend your money. If you're getting something like a laptop, you're probably not building it yourself. And so when you're just picking between components, make sure that you get the right amount of RAM. And look at, when you have 2 or 3 different options, go and look at the price difference and then compare that to the difference in performance. So for example, with a CPU, you'll get benchmarks where it's a standardized measurement. One CPU will cost $100, the other one costs $200. But CPU A, it might have a benchmark rating of 2,000. Then the $200 one will have a benchmark of 3,000. So you're doubling the price, but you're not doubling the performance benchmark of that processor. What that tells you is what's the best bang for your buck, and when are you starting to get the point of spending a lot of money just to get a little bit faster of a processor. It's like a race car. It's like you get a little bit of tiny extra bit of performance, goes from 0 to 60 a tiny bit faster, but you're paying thousands of dollars just to shave off a tenth of a second. So that's where it gets into. And the same thing in the kitchen with really high-end stuff. Unless you really know what you're doing, you probably don't need to be spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on each appliance in your kitchen, each pot and pan that you have, unless you really know what you're doing. So make sure you're paying attention to that performance stuff, and then you can always upgrade almost anything later on. So it's not that big of a deal. We'll be getting more into that kind of stuff in future videos. Now let's talk about how to save money when you're building a computer. Probably the single biggest thing you can do is just to buy used instead of buying new. And a lot of people, when they think of buying a used computer or used computer components, they think of used stuff in other areas, like used clothing, for example, or a used car. And a lot of times with those sorts of things, there's a lot of rough and tumble. There's a lot of wear that happens and friction that that really lowers the quality of the component over time. But with most computer components, they really they have a very long life, and because they're inside a case and they're being kept at a safe temperature, nothing, for the most part, except for a few components like hard drives. Hard drives are really have the shortest lifespan of anything inside a computer. Except for hard drives, you really don't have to worry about most used components being significantly worse than something that's brand new. So usually what happens with components is, and I'm saying except for hard drives, everything else except for hard drives, usually what's going to happen is you're going to want to replace that because it's such old, slow technology before it's going to just give out and die on you. So for the most part, anything that's new, that's a computer component, it's going to get to the point where you just don't want to use it anymore because it's so slow before it actually dies on you. That's what's going to happen the vast majority of the time. And what that means is if you're buying something used, the majority of the time it's going to be a good piece of equipment and you're going to get the exact same performance as if you bought it new. And you're usually going to be able to save at least 25, sometimes 50% or even more on that piece of equipment. So you'll hear later about how I saved a lot of money on the computer the bigger black computer that I've been showing you. How I saved money on that by finding the case on Craigslist, and then it turned out the guy had a few other components that he also wanted to sell at a steep discount, and this stuff was barely used. Here's the other big thing that people don't realize about used components, especially when you're going on eBay, because eBay is really Craigslist. I usually don't go there. I don't want to have to go pick something up. And so eBay is really the one-stop shop if you're buying used components. What a lot of people don't realize about new used stuff on eBay, and whether that's just a component for your desktop tower or it's an entire laptop. I have 4 younger brothers, and I've always been in charge of helping them pick out their laptops. And so I've learned a lot about how to get cheaper laptops on eBay by buying them used. And the trick to it really just comes down to understanding who is selling these used components, these used computers and components. And the people that are selling a lot of these laptops are businesses. They're businesses that own a ton of laptops. They don't necessarily get used every day. And if they do get used, they're getting used in a business environment. Or sometimes it's in a school environment, for example, where they keep these computers locked away and they maybe get an hour or 2 of use each day, and per week, maybe just a few hours. So even though they're used, they're not used in the same way that a consumer ownership is going to be using it. So what I've been able to find just incredible deals, saving hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars just buying used. So it's a huge advantage, and I'm just amazed when I get this stuff in the mail, and I literally can't tell that it looks new. It looks like it literally just came out of the packaging. There's no dents, there's no bangs or bruises. And here's the other thing. These companies that are selling these used laptops, they usually have a return policy, so anything that you find is usually going to fall apart within 30 days, or you're just going to find an issue and they're going to resolve that for you. But I've never had that experience. Through all the computers that I've bought, they've all turned out great, never had a problem with them. This one time, I found these netbooks, and they were these great netbooks for, I think, $150, $200 each. And I think we ended up buying 5 or 6 of them for basically everyone in my family. And I still have one of them that I use every once in a while because it just has such great battery life. And when I want to do some writing and really not have any distractions, having a low power computer that I can just type away on is great. And I use that for writing my first book. So it's something I still use, and that's something I got really cheaply off eBay. I think the listed original price was probably $500. and we got it for 150 or 200. So you can just find some amazing deals on eBay. The other thing is, I don't like doing auctions, and you probably don't either. The interesting thing about eBay is when it first came out, there was a lot of excitement about, wow, you can go online and do an auction and get bid on things, and that was a novelty. But nowadays, and in the last several years, eBay has found that people using the buy it now feature are far outnumbering the amount of people that are bidding on things. And what I don't like about bidding on things is usually it takes several days for each item, and then you're not sure if you're going to win it. So there's a lot of uncertainty there, and you can end up spending weeks just bidding on stuff, and those weeks that go by are going to impact your productivity, and it's also wasted time when you're trying to bid on stuff. So what I do on eBay is I look at, you have to be signed in to do this unless they've changed it recently, but you'll see a little checkbox on the left-hand side that says completed listings and sold listings. And they'll show you exactly how much people are paying for whatever computer or component you're looking at. And so that's going to give you a really good idea of, okay, if I got really lucky on an auction and I got at the lowest price, this is what I would get it for. For a buy it now, I'll get it at this price, and an average auction would be here. So the way I decide on whether I'm going to bid or do a buy it now is I'll look at what is the difference between the average auction price and then what's the lowest buy it now price. And if it's only 20, 30 bucks, I'm not going to spend days and days trying to bid on something and just, you can easily sink a couple hours into that, and it's just not worth your time when you're talking about 20, 30, 40 bucks. So that's how I approach it. The other thing is there's certain times during the year, especially Black Friday, when you can just get stuff cheaply, and there's really great deal sites. So Slick Deals is probably the best one if you're just going to use one. They have great deals on computers, cameras. So if you're in the market for that, but you're not in a rush, spend a couple months just checking that site for 30 seconds each day, scroll through, and you can piece together and get some really good deals on stuff. So anytime you're going to be buying something that's more than 100, 200 bucks, it usually pays to wait for that sort of thing unless you're in a rush to buy that piece of equipment. So if you're looking at, okay, I want to get a printer, I want to spend a couple hundred on it, or I want to get a new laptop, I want to wait for the right deal, then just make sure you check sites like that every day, and then pull the trigger and read the reviews underneath each deal. You get a lot of interesting insights from that also. In terms of where to buy stuff new, Newegg for me has always definitely had the best shipping by far. Even if you use their free shipping, which they say is 4 to 7 days, I almost always get things within a day or two, and I've been really amazed at how quickly stuff comes. So the great thing about Newegg is they also almost always have the cheapest price, or it's within $1 or $2 of what you'll find on Amazon or other sites. So Newegg is really where I buy almost all my electronic stuff, unless I'm going to go to eBay to get something that's used. The other thing is, don't waste your time deciding between components. So a lot of people think the only cost is money, but there's other costs, and time is a major cost. So the time you spend bidding on auctions or researching things, that you can waste a lot of time that way. So I'll give you an example. I was looking for RAM for my new computer, and I was trying to compare, well, I had decided I was one or the other. One was $70, one was $80. And I started looking at, okay, what are the differences in speeds? Is this compatible? Are these both going to be able to use both of the highest rated speeds on these for my motherboard? What do the reviews on Newegg say? And eventually I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to spend the extra $10 and not spend another second doing research on this, because people spend way too much time researching certain purchases when there's the amount of gain I mean, it pays to research, but you also have to be careful spending too much time on things that don't make a big difference. So spend the time on things that are going to make the big difference. Don't spend time on things that are going to make a small difference. So if the difference is 5, 10, 15, 20 bucks, don't spend half an hour, 2 hours researching the differences. Just get the more expensive one and make a quick decision. And you're going to feel better about it at the end of the day anyways. So definitely use eBay, usually for more expensive stuff, or if you want to get something that, like a cable. This happens quite a bit where sometimes you'll have a cable that'll cost $20 or $30, like a phone charger, and you can get it on eBay for $2 or $3. Another thing about eBay that's interesting is you can get certain components really cheap from China, or you can get them a little bit more expensive from California. So, and other parts of the country, big port cities like New York. So what I do for that is something coming from China is usually going to take about 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks to get here. So you can sometimes get something like these earbuds. I'm always losing earbuds, and you know, I've had a lot of bad experiences where they just get broken, or I lose one of the little rubber pieces. And so I just buy a whole big bunch. Let me just actually grab the bags and I'll show you. And the reason I do this is because these things literally cost less. They cost $1 each. So I got these in the mail about a week ago. And this is like 10 or 15, I think, yeah, it's about 10 earbuds, like headphones. And they're all exactly the same. Great thing about this is I can throw 1 or 2 of these in my backpack, in a travel bag. I can leave one in the car. I mean, and they work fine. So just stuff like that. You would probably have to pay $4 or $5 for each of those if you bought them from a seller in the United States. So if you want something quickly, like within a week, and it's worth the extra couple bucks, then buy it from, on the left-hand side, just select the option that says only sellers in North America, or only sellers in the United States. And usually you'll find the exact same thing. It's just a few dollars extra. So that's the strategy I use for buying like cheap components, like headphones, USB adapters, stuff like that, cables, HDMI cables. This is the kind of stuff that eBay is really great for. So any sort of cheap, small component where retail stores, especially like a Best Buy, or, you know, it used to be Circuit City, Walgreens, CVS, they'll sell a component like a cable that costs $2 to manufacture for $20 or $30. And so that's one of the best things to go on eBay for, because there's just really cheap stuff, and you can be buying stuff from China where it's manufactured, and it's just super, super, super cheap. Another thing to do with that is, you know, when I started out, I just ordered one of these, and I got it in the mail, tested it out, see how it feels in my ear. If it feels good, immediately buy 5 or 10 more of them, and then you just have them. People will lose their earbuds, and, you know, I just have them. So it's just, they're really cheap, really easy to use, and it solved the problem of just not being able to find them, losing them. So that's overall my strategy. So Amazon.com, really great for reviews. Newegg is really great for reviews. So reviews are also really important. Even if you're not going to buy something on Amazon or even Newegg, let's say you're going to buy it on, let's say you're going to buy a used processor like I did off eBay. Well, I'm going to first read the reviews on Newegg, read the reviews on Amazon, look at what the other suggested products are, or equivalent products, or products in the same price range, or this person also bought this item. That information is really useful. You can get that information for free from a Newegg or an Amazon, and then you can take that and go buy it used on eBay. So these sites aren't useful just because you can buy stuff there, but also because you can get information there. So Slick Deals is good for getting deals, finding deals. Sometimes they're on other sites like Tiger Direct or Best Buy or whatever. Craigslist is good for stuff like I need another 24-inch display, but I didn't want to spend a lot of money on it, so I just found one on Craigslist that was really cheap. So Craigslist can be good for certain bigger purchases that you're willing to travel for, or the shipping would be fairly expensive. But for the most part, I'm not using Craigslist. It's mostly eBay and Newegg. Amazon every once in a while. Amazon has a huge selection. Newegg has a huge selection. And then you can go to eBay and usually find it a little bit cheaper, or you can even get it used, which is going to be your best deal usually. So the major thing I have to say is most of the time buying something new, it's going to work out perfectly. So the amount of money you save buying used is more going to make up for the 1 or 2 rare times when something may go wrong. And because these sellers, especially on eBay, they have their reputation to think about, they're usually more than willing to work something out, whether either you find a crack on something, it's cosmetic, you want them to refund you a certain amount, $5 or $10, $20 from the purchase price, or you want to send it back and get another one, or you just want them to send a replacement. Sometimes they won't even ask you to send it back. So there's a lot to take advantage of in terms of saving money online, buying computer components. So I definitely recommend you check out all those sites. Here's another common question. What kind of computers are there? And in this course, you're seeing desktop towers. Those are sort of traditional computers, but there's tons of computers all over the world in almost any conceivable location, but we don't call them computers. So I want to have this question in the course just so you have a better understanding and you can start to generalize about what a computer is. Well, when you were in math class, you had a calculator. That's a mini computer. Originally, a computer was not a word for a machine. It was a word for a human being that did a certain job. So what a computer is somebody, or the way the term used to be used is a computer was somebody who added and subtracted, did mathematical operations on numbers, added, subtracted, multiply, divide, other stuff like that. And so over time, as machines got the ability to do calculations, that word, that label for a certain occupation for a person was transferred over to the machine. And now now that label is stuck to the machine, and that role of being a computer, that as an occupation, doesn't really exist anymore. So that's where the word originally comes from. But let's get into the main point of this question. You have the desktop tower. Well, it turns out desktop towers are becoming less and less popular. You don't really need them as much anymore. You can get so much power inside a laptop nowadays, and even a tablet and a phone. I mean, we've got quad-core, 8-core phones nowadays. So there's fewer and fewer reasons why you would need a tower computer. And most people are using laptops. So laptop is another major type of computer, and computers keep on getting smaller. So in terms of smaller than a laptop, you have tablets, and you also have phones. We're getting even smaller now with wearables, or a watch where you have a little screen on the watch. So, and then there's phablets, which is somewhere in between a phone and a tablet, is something about this size. You could consider it just a very small tablet. But that's another type of computer. And basically, they work exactly the same. They have all the same components inside them as a regular desktop computer has. The only difference is it's all integrated in a very tight environment, and usually it's hard or impossible to go in and replace things. So this right here is my iPhone. And the thing about an iPhone that's kind of annoying is you can't take out the battery and put in a fresh battery. So if you're traveling, if you're on the road, and you want to have multiple batteries, you can't do it. And And over time, batteries, whether it's a laptop, a tablet, a phone, they lose their charge, and not just lose their charge, but they lose their overall capacity. So they can't hold as much of a charge as they used to when they were fresh out of the factory. And so you either have to send it to Apple and you don't have a phone for a couple weeks, or you can buy a replacement battery off eBay or other sites and do it yourself. And because I like taking stuff apart, just seeing how it works inside, I got this little kit for maybe 10, 15 bucks. You get a little screwdriver that can unscrew those screws at the bottom of your iPhone, and then you can open up the phone and replace the battery. So these two screws right here that have a special pattern on them, so you need a special screwdriver to be able to do that. Let's see. Yeah, so opening up a laptop, opening up a phone or a tablet is difficult, if not impossible. And as they make these things smaller and smaller, it's more of an engineering challenge to fit everything in there. So it's kind of like once you get it in there, you don't really want to have to take it back out. Most people aren't interested in replacing components. They're just going to buy a whole new computer. And that's what companies want also. They don't want people just going out and buying a component and keeping their device alive longer. They want people to use it for a few years and then feel like it's too slow and buy the next version of whatever with the additional bells and whistles. So there's really less and less and less focus on taking things apart, understanding how they work inside. And so that's why this course is so important. Another type of computer, now going in the opposite direction, is computers that are bigger than your average tower. So those are, for the most part, servers. And servers are just like in a restaurant, you have a server. So somebody that brings out your food and delivers it to you. So the idea of a server is, think about any website. How do those files get to your computer? Anytime you're seeing a website, that's data that the website sent to you. And when we say the website sent it to you, really what happened is that data is sitting on a server, which is just a computer. It can be just like a tower computer. You could even use a laptop as a makeshift server. It's just holding those files there, and then it delivers those files to you when you go to that website, when you type in the URL. So that's how servers work. And in big data centers like a Facebook, Google, what they do is they have these cabinets, and the cabinets are 19 inches wide, just about 1.5 feet wide, and there are these cabinets. And a good way to visualize it is, imagine a file cabinet, a regular 4 or 5 door drawer file cabinet. File cabinet needs to be wide enough to hold a piece of paper, which is 11 inches wide. So a file cabinet is usually going to be 13, 14 inches wide. So think about if you add a couple extra inches on each side of that file cabinet, that's how wide a server rack is going to be. And these racks actually aren't just used for computers. They're also used for audio equipment and video equipment. So if you go into a big home that has a home theater system, for example, they're going to have all the different pieces inside a setup like that. If you go to a big rock concert, they're going to have all the audio equipment. I remember when I was volunteering at the local TV station, and we had a big truck that had all the switches and equipment in it, and would beam up the signal so people could watch the local football, sports games, town meeting, etc. It had all these racks and racks inside the truck, and those were all a standard size. And computers use that same standard size. So you have a cabinet that's about 6 feet tall, sometimes a little bit taller, and it's just computers, and they usually don't have a screen. It's just a computer, and most of the time they don't even need a screen. So you can access those servers from somewhere else using Ethernet cables and a network. And the next level above that is when you're connecting multiple computers. So when you hear something like a supercomputer, like Deep Blue that went on Jeopardy, that's a supercomputer. And what that means is multiple computers connected together, acting as one. So that's the way you really build a lot of power inside a computer. And or if you want something that can do more than the work of one computer, you need to combine those resources. And one interesting application of that is the way Google builds a lot of their data centers. They found that the cheapest way to do it is to take a bunch of really cheap, oftentimes used components, used computers, used computer cases, hard drives. And what they do is they just put them together in these huge warehouses, and they build these supercomputers. They have just hundreds and hundreds of these cheap towers connected together. And what they do is they design their system, their data storage system, so that multiple hard drives, multiple servers or computers or towers can fail at the same time. And because there's enough backup copies of the data, everything will go off without a hitch and they won't lose data. So that's one of the applications, ways of using technology to combine computers together. But that gives you an idea of what kind of computers are out there. Wearables are the next big thing. Building technology into, like, remember Google Glass and having a little computer inside your glasses. We're seeing with Oculus Rift with virtual reality, and it covers your eyes and you can go in a different place. Video game consoles, that's another example of computer. A lot of the appliances in your kitchen have little computers in them. Your microwave has a little computer in it. Your fridge may have a little computer in it. And fridges with a little TV screen, or a fridge that can order food for you. More and more stuff in our homes are getting little computers built into them because it just gives them more functionality. A car is another example of a computer. Any computer, any car built, I'd say, in the late 80s or anytime in the 90s, 2000s, is going to have a computer in it. You can get a special thing that reads the data off the internal computer in your car, and it gives you a ton of data. And you see with Tesla, Tesla is the first car company that was built by somebody who was native to computers and really understood them. And so you see Elon Musk just doing amazing things with the Tesla, like has the huge screen inside the middle of the console, and he doesn't think about it in the same way other car companies do. So he really stresses the idea of this car as a computer, and eventually with self-driving cars, which are already being tested and are out in limited versions, in terms of they have lane assist, they can parallel park for you, stuff like that. But we're getting to the point where automatic driverless cars is going to be reality within about 5 years. So a car is a computer, and especially with these self-driving cars, it's a huge new development in terms of how we use computers. So there's computers all over the place, and people tend to not see things as computers. They don't see their television as a computer. They don't see their radio as a computer. But all of these things are computers, and when you take them apart and you're looking at the actual circuit board, you really start to see the similarities. So that's why I really want to stress in this course that you get to see inside the computer, see the circuit board, and see how similar the components are, how they work together. So, and I also highly recommend that you take apart your old stuff. So if you're going to throw away a laptop or desktop computer, take it apart. Take apart an old TV, get the screwdriver out, or just, do whatever you have to do to get that case open and look at what's inside and try to understand what's going on. If you have an old printer, take it apart, find the circuit board, find the wires. You're going to start to see the commonalities. Old cell phone, just take it apart. Just look at it and start to understand how the same things show up in all these different places. It really will open up your eyes to how computers work and how the various components inside work. Final thing I'll leave you with is check out sites like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, where people are building their own versions of laptops, phones, tablets without manufacturers. you don't need a huge factory anymore necessarily to build a laptop that can have replaceable features or replaceable hardware. Same thing with a cell phone. So sites like Kickstarter, where you can bring a bunch of backers together and fund something without a big bank or big investors, we're seeing a lot of innovation in hardware that we didn't have the technology, prices hadn't come down enough until relatively recently to make this sort of stuff possible. So this is an area to keep your eyes on, because there's just going to be more, especially with 3D printers, the sky is really the limit, and we're still at the very early stages in terms of seeing what small companies can create in terms of hardware, and even individuals with 3D printers. So we're really just at the beginning stages. Definitely keep your eyes out for the future, especially in terms of phones, tablets, and cell phones, for the kind of new technology where just entrepreneurs and a team of a few people can come together and build really interesting hardware. And this is where you start. Another big question with computers, and you're probably asking yourself this in the back of your mind as you're watching this and hearing about all the different types of computers, and you're going to see a bunch more in the later sections, is how hard is it really to build a computer, and where can I get help? So it can be kind of complex in the beginning, because there's a lot of different formats, there's a lot of acronyms, it's not always clear what works with what, and sometimes the specifications that a company gives you aren't accurate, or there's things that are missing from it and it's ambiguous. So I really have two pieces of advice for you. First of all, it's not as hard as it seems, and it's a lot easier nowadays than it used to be. Computer components and manufacturers are getting better and better at just designing things well and making sure things work together properly. For example, if a motherboard only supports a certain speed for memory, that memory will support can run at multiple speeds. So it may run at a lower than the highest speed it can go. Like a lot of school buses have a speed limit governor where they can't go higher than 55 or 60 miles an hour. So that engine can go a lot faster, but it's got a governor on it. So if a motherboard is slower, but the memory is faster, that memory can come down and work at the slower speed. And so they're not going to be completely incompatible. So that's the sort of stuff you sometimes have to think about. But really the first place to go is PC Parts Picker. This is a website where you can plug in what memory you want to use, what motherboard you want to use, and all the other components, processor, and it'll tell you whether those parts are compatible or not. Really, really useful. This wasn't around when I was first building my first computer, and I've used it to build my new one, and it's worked out perfectly. They also give you recommendations. You can search for you can search, let's say you pick a motherboard and you're looking for your memory. You can just look at the memory that's compatible with your computer. So you're not looking through a bunch of extraneous results. Then you can see how much that costs at the lowest retailer. So they'll take Newegg, Amazon, a bunch of other websites, show you the cheapest price. And then also they'll show you the ratings for that out of 5 stars for each of those components, and for each your options for each component. So PC Parts Picker is huge. And then also, as I was saying before, Amazon and Newegg, they both have a ton. They're the best places online to find reviews. So check out those websites and read the reviews, and then go and make your purchase wherever it's cheapest. But I do highly recommend Newegg if you want stuff get shipped free and very quickly. The other thing is, where to get free help? Well, the best thing to do is just go on an online forum. There's tons of forums out there for people that are building computers, computer enthusiasts. Great thing about PC Picker is that Parts Picker is that they have a way for people to show what their computer build is, take pictures of it, and then also list all their components. So you can see what components other people are using, and you can model your build off somebody else's build. Once you pick a case, once you pick a motherboard or a certain processor, then you can just throw that into Google, and you'll see a bunch of people that have done a build with that. So you could put in the name of the processor, for example, and then just put the keyword build and then maybe forum or something like that. Put that into Google search and you're going to get a ton of examples. And that's a great way to find people that have already built a computer. And then once you find a popular forum, just post what your ideas, what you're going for, how much money you want to spend, what components you've already decided on, which ones you're debating between, which ones you have no idea, compatibility issues, and you'll get some really great advice. So it's definitely anything related to computers or programming. It's probably the easiest subject to get free help with on the internet, because it makes sense. People that are into computers, into programming, they spend time on the internet already. It's kind of like a second home to them. So you're going to be able to find a lot of free help very easily. So it's not one of those things. In a lot of other areas, things you're learning can be tough to find active forums online where people are talking and helping each other. But anything related to computer hardware, software, really easy to find free help. So you're not going to have a problem with that. So use PC Parts Picker to make sure your stuff is compatible. Read the reviews on Amazon and Newegg. Sometimes people on Newegg and Amazon will tell you their entire build. And then just do some basic Google searching for people using the same components you are in a build. Check out their builds. And you'll discover which forums are the best based on what sort of thing you're after. Like if you're building an audio, if you're an audio producer or a music producer, you go to that type of forum. If you're really into networking or servers, you go to that forum. Gaming, you go to a different forum. So there's going to be different forums for different uses. You're going to find those very quickly with your Google searching, and then just create an account, post a question, and you should be getting help in no time. And just make sure to give people in your post be polite about it, and just give them as much information as you can so that they can give you help and they don't have to ask you clarifying questions. They don't have to ask you for more information. Really try to put it all there, put it in an organized format. People appreciate it, and you'll get some really high quality help for free. One of the biggest questions people have is, what makes a computer fast? What are the important factors in the performance of a computer? And this is a similar question to, well, what matters in the kitchen? Where should you invest your money? So the first thing is to recognize that it's not all about the equipment. It's also about how you use the hardware that you have, and also what operating system you're using. So this applies in the kitchen also. If you have really high-end tools but you're not using them properly, you can cause them to go bad a lot faster. For example, a knife. If you're not constantly sharpening that knife, you're going to eventually have to bring it back. It's not going to cut as quickly. It's not going to cut as well. It's going to be more dangerous. You're more likely to cut yourself. And then you're going to have to spend money to bring it to a professional to have them sharpen it, because what happens with the blade over time is you just can't get any you can't continue to sharpen it by hand forever. You need to take it to a professional. So with computer and with performance, what you're looking at is, at the beginning, you're looking at things like, what kind of hard drive is it? That's going to tell you how fast applications are going to load, how fast the computer is going to turn on, and Windows or Apple or whatever, to get to the point where you log into your computer. Standard solid state drives are significantly faster than regular hard drives. So that's one way you can increase performance. Another big way is having a faster processor. So having a multi-threaded processor with multiple cores, that's good. And also having something with just a higher clock speed. So 2 gigahertz, 3 gigahertz, 4 gigahertz. If you want to add liquid cooling or another sort of cooling system, you can overclock that processor. That just means running it faster than the rated speed that they recommend for it. So those are important. Also memory. So whether you have 4 gigabytes, 8 gigabytes, 16, 32 gigabytes of RAM, that's, as you'll learn more about, is like the amount of counter space you have in your kitchen. So the more counter space you have, the more different things you can have out and be working on at the same time. If you don't have a lot of counter space, then things get really cramped and you can only do one thing at a time. So it takes longer to get stuff done. Besides RAM, you also have, we talked about processor, RAM, hard drive, and cooling. Those are really the main things. There's other things like graphics card that comes into play when you're gaming, and for certain graphics programs, 3D rendering, 2D special effects. But for the most part, those are the three major things. Other things to look at are the operating system. So Apple specifically chooses hardware to match their operating system and their software. And that means that they can have, if you take two equal computers, the Apple computer is going to run better because they design it from the ground up to work with that hardware. Same thing with an Xbox or a PS2 or a GameCube, that type of stuff, or a handheld or a phone. They're designing things to work on a specific set of hardware, specific combination of a processor, a hard drive, memory, and other stuff. And so they can tweak it to get the maximum out of it. But if you're designing something that's going to run on a ton of different types of computers, you can't optimize it in that way. So there's certain situations where you can optimize for a specific hardware setup, and that's going to get you much better performance if you have to meet a broad set of specifications. Another big thing is the amount of fragmentation on your hard drive. So what this means is, go back to the kitchen example. Let's say you just built a new kitchen or you're moving into a new house or apartment. So there's nothing in any of the cabinets. So you go to the grocery store, you buy stuff, and you think, okay, I kind of know where I'm going to organize everything. And you haven't completely filled up all the cabinets. There's lots of space. Nothing's crowded. You know where everything is. But as the months and the years go by, you add more stuff. Stuff gets old, but it's in the back of the cabinet. There's just a bunch of stuff, and it's unorganized, and it's taking up almost all the space inside those cabinets. Well, that's what fragmentation is. It's when you have a bunch of different files, and we're talking thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of files on a hard drive, and they're all scattered all over the place. The way on a regular hard drive, the way the data is stored is on a disk, think like a pizza. And so you have the different ingredients on the pizza, meaning the different toppings. Those represent different files. So you have those sprinkled around the hard drive. Now, when you're first writing data onto a blank hard drive, it's going to place those toppings in sequence. So think of a spiral of, let's say, or just take a slice, and just on that one slice is going to be just pepperoni, and everything else is just cheese. So that's blank space on the hard drive. The next slice is just sausage. The next slice is just peppers. The next slice is just onions, whatever. But as time goes by, as you delete certain files and you put new files on there, well, all the big slices of blank space have been used up. So the only space that's available is where you removed one of those toppings. And so over time, the pizza gets more and more scattered and unorganized, and you no longer see those definite boundaries of the slices. It's just a bunch of stuff scattered all over the place. So with fragmentation, what happens is, as you use that hard drive over the months and years, the files on the hard drive get more and more disorganized. And of course, your folders and your folder structure can be highly organized, but on the disk itself, meaning where the computer decides to put the data on that hard drive, it can be very unorganized. And what that means is it takes longer for the ARM that's in the computer, in the hard drive. Think about like an old record player. It has that one ARM and it reads data. Well, the ARM inside a hard drive is the disk is spinning like this, and then the ARM can just pick up one file. So imagine if you have a pizza rotating like this, and you have an ARM that can go out and pick one topping off of that pizza. And that's like loading up one file. Now, let's say you're loading up a program like Photoshop. That has hundreds of files that need to be loaded before it's ready to go and you can start using it. So that you can imagine that ARM going around the pizza and picking up all those little files it needs so that it can start Photoshop up. Well, if all those files are in one place on the hard drive, it can do that very quickly. But if they're all in random places along that platter, that magnetic platter inside the hard drive, then it's going to take a lot longer to load up that data. So one of the things you can do is just get an application that defrags the hard drive. But it's also a benefit you're just going to get when you're using a blank hard drive or a new hard drive. One of the advantages of solid state drives is they're much better at random access. So with a regular spinning hard drive with a platter in it, it's spinning and the arm has to go around and find the data. And so if data is in a sequence where it can read it off like it's in a spiral motion, that's very efficient, very fast. Whereas if it's just scattered randomly, that's a lot slower. In a solid state drive, it's basically the equivalent of like a little USB flash drive, and it's actually fairly similar to RAM that you're using, your random access memory in your computer. When it says 4 gigs, 8 gigs, 16 gigs of RAM or of memory, that's what they're talking about. That's random access memory. It can randomly access things very quickly. So a solid state drive gives you that higher level of performance. And so that's why when you're building a computer or you want to upgrade your computer, whatever hard drive you store the operating system files on and all your applications, talking Photoshop, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Chrome, whatever it is, all those applications and that operating system should be on a solid state drive. That's going to give you a big boost in performance. So those are the major things that decide how fast your computer is. People like to think about cores and multi-threading. The one thing to remember about that is most applications aren't designed to take full advantage of those. So you may have 4 cores or 8 cores, but most applications are just going to be able to run on one of those cores. So you're not going to get the full advantage most of the time. So make sure you really do your research to make sure that the way you're planning on using your computer is going to be able to take advantage of those multiple cores. In this video, we're going to be talking about power supplies. The power supply in your body is your heart. And that's pumping the blood through and providing oxygen, sending that glucose, the energy that your body uses to move muscles, basically do everything. In the kitchen, you've got electricity, and then you've also got gas, if you've got a gas-burning stove. Those are the 2 main ways that you provide energy to all the appliances inside your kitchen. Then obviously the chef is running on their own power, and that all the food they're eating is turning into protein, it's turning into glucose, and that's what they're using to power themselves. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the power supply inside the computer, and we already touched on this briefly when we looked at the motherboard, but now let's take another look. So down here you see all these cables. All these cables are coming out of this one power supply right here. They're actually coming out of just a small hole inside there. Right there. Small hole. All these cables come out of that little hole right there. And if we turn around the computer to the back for a second, you can see the power supply from the back. So you're always going to see this same 3-prong connector, and you're going to see the on-off switch. So this is on, that's off. The 0 is always off. So now let's take a look at the different wires, different power wires that come out of the power supply. One sec. So the first important one is this. This goes right into the motherboard. See, it's the widest one, has a bunch of different colors. This one also goes into the motherboard, and you see it has the possibility of either putting in 6 pins or 8 pins. Focus that so you can see that. That's the 6, and then you can add that one to add an 8th. So these two are going to go to the motherboard. Then you have additional of these. You have more of these, and different power supplies are going to give you a different number. You need more than one of these. You can see they're PCIe. You need these to power certain PCI extenders, like a graphics card. If you have 2 graphics cards and it's a gaming machine, you're going to need 2 of these just for that. You might need a 3rd one for something else you're adding on that needs extra power. And then these 2 are going to go to your motherboard. So that's what all of these are for. And sometimes you can find adapters to turn this into one of the other kind of power adapters. So these are kind of one type, and they have a specific use. Then there's 2 other main types. This one right here is Molex. So you see it doesn't have square edges. The edges are, those corners are cut on one side. So that's a Molex right there. And the reason why I don't like these and why they've been replaced is because they don't, and you can see what the other end looks like. This is the female, and this right here is the male. So that's the male. That's the female right there. And so these pins don't always go in right, and they can get stuck, and they can get bent off to a side. So they're not as easy to use as the new connectors, which are these ones, the SATA. So these ones are in an L shape. You can see that notch right here, and that makes it very easy to make sure that you're putting it in the right direction. So there's one final one, or actually, yeah, right here, that connector. And that one has a special use. That goes into a floppy drive. So you don't usually need one of these anymore. It can be handy to have a floppy drive. Sometimes you need to boot off of a floppy drive, but you don't see a lot of these anymore. And that's basically all there is to a power supply. Is you have these types of connectors. These are the old-fashioned ones, and the SATA ones are the newer ones. And there's actually, I have one more thing to show you. I'll go grab that, and it's an adapter that turns a Molex into a SATA. So I'll go grab that. Alright, I've got a whole second set of power cables to show you right here, and there are a couple different things. So this is just an extender, and it's an extender, but it also splits off. So it would just attach onto the end, and then coming off of it is a fan power. So let's zoom in on that. So a fan connector is just going to have those two pins inside of it. It has these two notches right here and right here, and those notches make sure you put it in the right way. So the idea behind this connector is, because a fan takes such a small amount of power, you can just siphon off a tiny stream of power to go to the fan, and then use this connector like you normally would. Next one we'll look at is another extender. This one's for SATA. So you can see the two male ends here. You don't see these ones very often, because usually this end is just coming out of the back of a hard drive. This is the female end that you would plug into like a hard drive or an optical drive. So you can see the power right here and then the data, and these two are connected together. They're usually not like that. You can see the power right here and the data right here. So the power is actually the power, the way it's coming in, you can see the four cables are exactly the same size. The four cables going in, and they're the same color. Even though this is a Molex and that's SATA power right there. They both have the same cables going in. So it's just a different connector that that's easier to use. This one's the newer one. So this is just an extension cable if the cable you're using isn't long enough. And then there's these. One end of this is Molex, one end of this is SATA. So this just converts Molex to SATA. So usually you'll have two, and this one converts one Molex to two SATA. So I'll zoom out for this. This cable, you can use an extra Molex connector. Let's just pull one out right here from the computer. So you have one of these that's not doing anything. You're not using any of these connectors. You just plug the Molex in. And see, putting it together is not always easy. I'm going to put this in. Putting it together is not always easy, because see how one of those is kind of bent off to the side and it's not straight? So when you're putting them together, you have to wiggle it around just right to get it to fit in there. So that's why these are really annoying to use. And that right there gives you the equivalent of a SATA connector. So this SATA connector right here, with this SATA cable here with two connectors, you can get the same thing with this and use a Molex to power it. So you can get these sort of adapter cables really cheaply, and they allow you to connect more, whether it's optical drives or hard drives, using these Molex connectors, because it's the exact same power going through it. So this one has one coming off of it, this one has two SATA coming off of it. So I just want to show you those connectors so you have a sense of, even if you don't have I want to show you those. So even if you don't have the exact amount of SATA connectors you want, you have a bunch of extra Molex you're not using, you can just convert them over very easily. And so you don't have to have the exact number of connectors that you want right out of the gate with the power supply that you buy. You can always adapt them from one format connector to the other, and it's not a big deal. So that's how our power supplies work. And that's it for this video. So I'll see you in the next one. In this video, we're going to talk about CPUs. So the CPU is this little thing right here. This is the brain of the computer. This is like the chef. And you want to be really careful with this thing. It goes inside the motherboard. It's like the chef. It's the one that's doing all the work at the end of the day. So I'm going to take the camera handheld again so that you can get a look at this thing. So we're looking up top at the computer. There's the power supply. We're looking at it upside down. This would be right side up for you. And we're looking at the CPU. So that's where the CPU plugs in. In previous videos, you've seen the heatsink above this heatsink. You've seen the top of the heatsink just sitting there like that. So we've taken the heatsink off and we're looking at the CPU now. So it's got this little thing that keeps it snug in there, this little arm. Take that little arm, you pull it out, and it stays snug right in there. But if you want to take the CPU out, you just pull that. You can see the little pins. That's a CPU, and it's got those random different missing pins so that you can't accidentally put it in the wrong way. So those little nubs correspond with the missing pieces here. This is the brain of the computer. And you can see they don't do much in terms of design here because they're not worried about you seeing it because it's always going to be covered. So we want to match them up like that and flip it over and just very gently let it fall into place. And there's also going to be one corner of the CPU that has gold on it. So see, that corner has gold, the other corners are just green. And you can see on the motherboard there's a tiny little triangle right there. I'll focus in on that for you. So there's the gold triangle, and there's the little triangle on the motherboard. And see, the other corners, they don't have that, do they? The other corners don't have that. So that's how you know you're putting it on in the right direction. You have the gold corner, gold triangle, and it matches up with that little triangle there. Once you do that, you take this, push it in, no problems. Then you take your heatsink and you mount that heatsink on top. So that's really it for the CPU. There's not a lot to look at. Every CPU is going to look almost exactly the same. The important bit is AMD. You can see the AMD right there. Is whether it's AMD or it's Intel. Those are the two big companies. And an AMD processor isn't going to fit inside an Intel motherboard. So a major decision you have to make right at the beginning is what kind of motherboard am I going to get, and that's based on the kind of CPU you're going to get. A lot of times And I'm going to put this camera back on the stand now. A lot of times you're going to be able to get an AMD processor at the same level that's a little bit cheaper than the Intel. So Intel is kind of the name brand, kind of like IBM, the company that, you know, every company is going to go for. It's the leading brand, but AMD you can get for the same price, you can get something faster, or you can get something at the same speed for a little bit, spending a little bit less. So this processor right here, I think it was about $100, 110, 20 new, but I was able to get this used off eBay for about $80, and it just came in a plastic container with this processor, this bare processor inside it. I just took it out, put it in, and it worked beautifully. So people are really scared to just go into their computer and start touching stuff and working with it. They're afraid that they're going to break something, but it's actually pretty tough to do that. As long as you're careful, it's pretty tough to mess things up, because as you've seen, as we've gone through this course, and you'll see in later videos also, they purposefully make the connection, the interface between any two things, they make it so that it can only go together in one way. There aren't multiple ways to connect the two pieces. So it's really hard to mess stuff up like that. And you're always going to have the motherboard manual, which is going to tell you how to plug everything into your motherboard. So your main decision when you're building a computer is, which kind of CPU am I going to use? And then that has to go into the equation of what kind of motherboard you're going to get. The downside of using AMD is that sometimes there's applications that only work on Intel, don't work with AMD. They're pretty rare. It's usually only if you're doing advanced kind of stuff. So like if you're doing programming or development type stuff, you're doing certain audio or video, certain operating systems, then the architecture of the processor is going to make a difference. So if you want to avoid stuff like that, it's usually you just spend a little bit of extra money and you get the Intel one. The reason I went with AMD is because I was originally just looking for a case, and I saw this case on Craigslist. It was basically new, been used like for maybe a month, and the guy said, hey, I have a motherboard, I have what else came with this? He had the power supply, and so I thought, you know what, my last computer was an Intel. I'm going to see what happens with an AMD and test it out, see what it's like. So I ended up just going, using the motherboard, bought the processor, and it's worked really well so far. So I don't have any complaints. I haven't noticed any differences between Intel and AMD, but it wasn't something where I needed to build a super powerful computer. The video editing I'm doing right now is 720p and 1080p. If I was building something for really intense graphics, doing a lot of special effects, then I would have gone with a more high-end rig, but I just don't need that for this. So the other thing when you're looking at CPUs is the amount of cores in it. So this has 6 cores in it, and the thing, anytime you see something that has 6 cores or 8 cores in it, a lot of times what they're doing is really starting with half as many cores and then using software, some sort of virtualization, to double that number. So if it said, the marketing speak is it has 6 cores, that means it actually has 3 cores, 3 real cores. And so the other thing about cores is ideally it's like having, instead of having one chef, it's like having 3 chefs, and they can each be doing different things at the same time. But most of the time when you're using a computer, and it's called multi-threading, so you would have 3 different threads, meaning instead of having one chef cooking the appetizer, the entree, and the dessert all at the same time. They only have two hands. You have three different chefs. One's working on the appetizer, one's on the entree, one's on the dessert. And ideally, that's a lot more efficient. But for a lot of tasks that you're doing, there's no way to split it up into thirds. And splitting it up into thirds might not save you any time. So let's say you're cooking a steak and putting in the oven. Well, having 3 ovens doesn't cook that steak any faster. Tripling the temperature isn't going to work either. You're just going to have the inside uncooked and the outside burnt and charred. So there's certain processes, and actually the majority of processes, you're not going to be able to cut the time down to a third by just throwing more energy or more power at it. What you can do is you can cut up that steak into 3 pieces, and those smaller pieces will cook faster, but probably not 3 times faster. So it turns out that the majority of what you're doing on your computer usually can't be cut up into thirds easily and done in a third of the time. So having a multi-threaded setup is rare, and it's usually specific applications. So if you're rendering video, and it's very easy to render, split up the frames into 3 parts and do it like that, or you're rendering into 3 different formats, that's a situation where you could use multi-threading and get an advantage out of it. But don't just assume that because it has multiple cores and it can do multi-threading that it's going to be able to fully utilize that. The majority of the time, I'd say 80-90% of the time, especially if you're just doing office type stuff, it's not going to make a big difference. So what that means is if you've got a high intensity application you're thinking about using and building a computer around that, make sure you do your research ahead of time and figure out, does having multiple cores in your processor going to help you or not? Can you use them or not? Sometimes a certain program will only be able to use 2 cores or 4 cores. So even if you have 8 cores, it can only use 4. So you're not getting any extra benefit out of those additional cores, or very minimal. So make sure you do your research to find out whether you're actually going to get a benefit that's commensurate with the additional processing power and the additional dollars that you're throwing at it, because most of the time it's not going to make a difference. So really make sure you do your research there. And then on cooling. So the reason we talk about cooling is because you need to cool anyways, but if you want to get more performance out of a CPU, and also for graphics cards, you can do something called overclocking. So overclocking is kind of like in the kitchen, somebody's moving at a normal pace for them. And some people's normal pace of doing things, it's like some people in the city walk faster than people out in the country, out in a rural area. So that sort of thing. So different chefs are going to move at different speeds. Chef that moves faster is like a CPU that's clocked at a higher rate, and the rate they use is called gigahertz. Really, back in the day, really old computers, like a little handheld calculator you might have, would be measured in megahertz. Mega meaning 1 million, giga meaning 1 billion. So gigahertz is billions per second. Hertz is per second. So gigahertz, 1 gigahertz means a billion of those processing units are happening per second. So a CPU that has 2 gigahertz, that's 2 billion. 3 gigahertz, 3 billion. And so when you're doing your research, you're going to notice, okay, that 2 gigahertz processor costs $200, but the 3 gigahertz processor costs $400. So I'm paying $100 more, but I'm not getting the same sort of boost. So when you're looking at different processors, you want to look at a CPU benchmark. And what that does is they run the same exact test. It's kind of like the NFL combine, or you ask somebody in the kitchen to cook an egg, and that's one of the best ways to tell how good a chef is just how they do scrambled eggs or how they cook an egg, because it's a very basic task, but it shows you a lot about how somebody cooks. So anyways, when you test all these different CPUs with the exact same test, you get a number. And just using the amount of gigahertz is not very accurate. It doesn't always give you an accurate reading of how fast that processor is. It's a rough estimate, but it's not perfect. So a better way to test them is to use these CPU benchmarks and then compare that with how much money you're spending on that CPU and find that sweet spot, and then you can always upgrade later on. So the thing about upgrading is sometimes it makes sense to just upgrade everything rather than upgrading one component, because if you want to use faster memory, you're going to want to go with DDR3, not DDR2, and you'll see that we talked about that in another video. But sometimes it makes sense to upgrade the motherboard, upgrade the CPU, the memory, the graphics card, everything at once. So make sure you're not thinking, oh, I'll just upgrade the processor, because if you wait 2 or 3 or 4 years to go by, it may be time to upgrade a bunch of other stuff also. So just think about how much processing speed you want, where that sweet spot is, and then how much you can overclock and how much extra it's going to cost to cool that processor down so you can overclock it. Because you can take a processor that runs at 3 gigahertz and you can overclock it to 3.5 gigahertz to 4 gigahertz and get a significant more processing speed out of that CPU. But one thing is it may void the warranty, and if you're not cooling it properly, you're going to have some serious issues. So you need to have that cooling figured out, and the best way to figure out what cooling is right for overclocking is find somebody who's using the exact same processor. There aren't that many processors out that come out in each generation, which means every year or two. So there aren't that many processors. Just once you decide on the processor, look at how much you can overclock it, what it costs to cool it down, and then you can go with that. So instead of spending more money on a more expensive processor, just get one that's slower but can be overclocked. And that's going to be on a case-by-case basis. It's like a chef. If you tell them, we need to get this stuff done really fast, their sweat's going to be pouring because they're moving around faster. You need to find a way to cool that guy down or that girl down so that they can work at that speed. So working faster, you may need to bring air conditioning in, because everybody knows working on a hot, muggy day, 90, 100 degrees inside, you just don't want to move around quickly because everything is just a lot hotter, and you need to move slowly to stay at that temperature that you want that's comfortable. So same kind of thing in the computer, not too complicated. Just to think about those basic things. Are you going to go with AMD or are you going to go with Intel? Make sure that your motherboard matches up. Make sure you know what cooling system you're going to use, and if you're going to overclock, you're going to need a better cooling system. So either a better heatsink, or you're going to want to go with some sort of liquid cooling. So that's it for CPUs, and I'll see you in the next video. In this video, we're going to talk about storage. So what that means is hard drives and also optical drives. So I'm going to show you a few different things. We're going to start off with hard drives. So we're going to go inside the case, and you're going to see the kind of connectors that are used, and you're going to get to see the different types of hard drives and optical drives. So let's start out with what's going on inside this computer. So let's zoom in. I'm actually going to take you handheld for this one. So check out that connector right there. See those other 4, and then there's the 5th one right there. It's got that L shape. Right there. That's a SATA connector. Right there. So these cables right here, if you pull like this blue one out, you can see what it looks like. see the L shape, and then you see the L shape of that connector. So there's another SATA connector right there. So and you can see they're even labeled SATA 3, SATA 3.1. So this one has 5 SATA ports integrated into the motherboard. Then there's also this card. So this is this adds additional SATA ports to your computer. So you can see 2 more. This card right here, I'll zoom out for a sec. On the outside, you don't see anything. And on the inside, there's those extra connectors. L-shaped connectors. There's 2 there, and then there's 2 on the back of the card. Right there. So this adds 4 additional ports. You have that plus those, gets you 9 total. And you can see it fits in right here into that black PCI connector. You can see the one above it is the exact same size. So you could add another one of these and that would add 4 more ports. So these SATA connectors are how you connect a hard drive. And we'll take a look at an actual hard drive and an optical drive and show you what the connector looks like. So I'll have that and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at a few different kinds of hard drives. This is your classic hard drive right here. That's what it looks like on the bottom. It's a 3 terabyte drive, and here's the connectors. So you see right there the SATA power and the SATA data connectors right there. those pins right there, those are jumper pins. You almost never have to use those anymore. So this is your standard 3.5-inch hard drive. And this would just go into a caddy like that. And then this would slide into one of these slots right here, and you just screw in, put a screw in right there, and that would attach that to the caddy. And because you've got these rubber washers, it reduces the amount of vibration that gets to the hard drive, because that vibration can cause issues. The way the hard drive works is there's an arm in there and a collection of magnetic discs, just metal discs. The best way to imagine it is like an old record player, and it records data on using a magnet with that arm and records onto the discs that are inside this box. So this is just a box for those circular discs with the arm on top of it. There really isn't a good metaphor in terms of a kitchen for doing something like that. This is a new type of hard drive. This is called a solid state drive, and this is 2.5 inches instead of 3.5 inches. This is the standard size for laptop hard drives. So this is a newer one. This is 500 gigabytes. And the great thing about these is they get your computer to start really quickly. But look, it's got the same exact connectors on the back of it as this hard drive. So those connectors are exactly the same in there. Same exact connectors. So that's the power connector, and then this is the data connector. And those just plug in real easy. Power goes right here, and data goes right here. So it's a little hard to see that with the lighting that I have set up, but that's how they plug together. I have a third type of hard drive. This one's pretty old, but this is what you used to use if you wanted to start up your computer really quickly. So this is another 2.5 Velociraptor drive, and this right here is just a mounting combined with a heat sink that'll just keep this thing cool. This is the size of hard drive you used to see in older laptops. But you see, it's got the exact same connectors on it, on the back. So they're all using that SATA interface. And then here's, you may have seen this in a previous video. This is a DVD drive. So this is 5.25 inches. It's got these racks on it where it slides into the computer up top here. Maybe wondering what this case is. Well, this thing's really cool. This takes a 5.25 size and adapts it so you can put additional hard drives in there. So that can be really useful if you're, because most of the time you don't need this space anymore. And so that's where you would put this optical drive right here. So that would just slide in there, and you just slide your hard drives in and your optical drives, and you're good to go. And you can see all these drives are using the exact same plugs. They've all got the same plugs. Data and power. So it's really pretty simple, and they've got that L shape so you can't plug it in the wrong way. So that's really all there is to storage. I have an older computer that has the older type of connectors. I'm going to grab that and I'll be back in a second. So this right here is an older computer. And it's got a hard drive in there, and I'm going to show you how it's different. So first you can see it has this sticker on it with all these weird shapes. Those are different jumper configurations, and the jumpers are those two white things back there. So first I'm going to take out this. This is the Molex connector. So if you didn't already watch the power supply video, watch that and you'll learn that this is just the older type of power connector. So they're really annoying to get in and pull out because they just get stuck in there. I'm really glad they got rid of these. I'm pulling pretty hard and they don't want to come out, and especially when it's an older computer, it can be tough to get those out. So there you can see the Molex connector right there, and then you can see the different jumper positions. So there's the two jumpers right here. And you can see there's one pin missing. They always do that so that you can figure out if things are put in the right way. So you can look there and see, okay, what jumper position was being used. But you never really have to worry about that stuff anymore. That was just back in the day. And then here's the data connection. So that's for power, and then this is for data. So these things are really old. This is called ATA. This is an ATA connector. And that's why SATA is just a newer version. It's just SATA. And most of the time they don't have a little handle like this to pull it out. So that's the female connector right there. And see how it has one slot missing, one pin blocked out, so you can't put it in the wrong direction. And then there's the male side. You can see there's one pin missing in the middle there, so you can't put it in the wrong way. So now you can see right there all the different pin setups, and then you can figure out which jumper configuration you have there. So this hard drive's just slid in there, and then this ATA cable, I mean, it's kind of a you can see up here there's also an optical drive with an ATA connector. There's also, that right there is a floppy drive. So power, ATA right here. I'm not going to try to pull those out. And then they connect to the motherboard, and it's pretty hard to see where they connect, so I can't really, it's tough to get the camera in there to show you, but it's right there. They connect right there. I could actually try to pull this one out, this blue one. But you can see why they wanted to get rid of these connectors. They're just so annoying to use. So this, pulling that one out, you hear weird sounds, like cracking sounds. You never know if something's really coming out the right way, and it's just creates a rat's nest. So that's on the motherboard, the male connector, and then this was the other end of the cable going into it. That's the female end, and see the missing port right there, so you put it in the right direction. So they're side by side. Right now I could pull this one out pretty easy too. You can see there's two connectors, so you don't have a lot of space. These things take up a ton of space, and you just don't need to use them anymore. So you're never going to buy a hard drive these days with one of these connectors. And so there's the cable on its own. We disconnected both ends, so you can see what it looks like. That blue end went into the motherboard. And then these ones probably went into an optical. This one went into an optical drive, and then this one probably went into a floppy drive or another hard drive. So yeah, just those two different kind of connectors, and you're probably not going to see these anymore, but this is the old style, and you can just see how inefficient it is, how ugly it is compared to the new one. So now let's talk a little bit more about storage. For a computer that you're building on your own, the biggest thing you can do to get the computer to start up faster, to get applications to move along faster, is to get a solid state drive. For storing anything else, using that regular size drive is going to be fine. So remember, this is the regular size drive. This is what you want to use for just storing video, storing music, whatever, pictures. And then this is a solid state drive, and you can even get these for your laptop. And these are great to speed up a laptop. So those are the two major kind of drives you're going to be looking at. And just make sure when you're deciding on size, look at how much it is cost per gigabyte. And right now 3 gigabytes is the best size to get in terms of cost per gigabyte, but that's just going to go up, and eventually be 4 gigabytes, 5 or 6 gigabytes. It's really all there is to it. So storage isn't too complicated. You're just using the basic SATA connectors. You may want to have an optical drive, but it's also useful to have an external optical drive because you just very rarely have to use them. The only reason I use an optical drive is for the rare DVD, or for when I want to install a new component and I need to install the driver, and the driver's on a CD, or software, get the software off the CD. But most of the time you just don't need them anymore. So that's it for this video. See you in the next one. Now let's talk about memory. In the kitchen, your short-term preparation work is done on a table or a counter, and that's not where you store your stuff permanently. You have a pantry for that, you have a closet for that, you have cabinets for that. But that short-term work area is very important. Having almost no space is like when you're in an airplane and they have those tiny little sinks where you can there's just a very small amount of counter space. So it's kind of the amount of counter space that you have available to you, and when you want to run a ton of different tasks, a ton of different tabs open in your computer, for example, you want to have a lot of memory. So it allows you to multitask, do a bunch of different things at the same time. Same thing as having a big desk in your office. And in terms of the human body and the human brain, your short-term working memory is the equivalent of the RAM inside your computer. So what that is like when they decided for telephone numbers, we're going to have a 7-digit telephone number. Well, they found that humans can't really easily remember more than 7 digits in their short-term memory. So our short-term memories are actually very small. In our culture today, people think that they can multitask, do a lot of different things without a cost, and it's a big mistake. So people texting while they're driving, or emailing, or even checking their GPS can be a danger because they think that they can process all that information, but really they can't. And there's a cost to switching. So our human brains have a very small amount of short-term kind of counter space or short-term working memory. So I'm going to show you inside this computer where that short-term memory is, and I'm going to show you what it actually looks like. So because of the way they show up in computers, you can't see, it's hard to really see what's going on with memory from this top view. But we're going to take out a piece of memory right here, this one. You just use these little tabs, pull it down, and then up here, get you up here a little bit. Up here, you also just push that white tab. Right there. And comes out very easily. So that's what it looks like. And this is what the connector looks like. So you see it has that notch in the middle. That ensures that you only put it in the right direction. So this is DDR2. You can see right there it says DDR2. The more common or modern one at the time of filming this is DDR3, and DDR4 will be coming next and is already out there. So you can see for this one, these are 2 gigabytes each. Each one of these DIMMs is 2 gigabytes, and you can see the 2 gigabyte right here where it says 2048 megabytes. So you have 4 of these in there, that means you have 8 gigabytes. You can think about a gigabyte of RAM as 1 square foot of counter space. So imagine having just 2 gigabytes of RAM. That's like having 2 square feet of counter space. That's almost nothing. So most computers nowadays are either 4 gigabytes, 8 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes of memory. And you can see the number, the notch is slightly offset, so you can only put it into the computer in one direction. I'll show you the female side of it. Right in there. Right there. You can see the little notch right there. And then we'll just put this one back in. And all these, you're always going to get them in pairs. You don't buy them on their own, you buy them in pairs. And you just be gentle with these and figure out which direction they're supposed to go in. You just push down and they automatically clip in and stay in there, so you never have to worry about them falling out. So that's how RAM works. Let me grab the other computer and I'll show you what the RAM looks like in the other computer. Okay, see if you can tell just by looking at it where the RAM is on this computer. It looks a little bit different. It's these blue things right here. So it's a little bit, I'll zoom you in now so you can see. I'm going to click this tab, black tab right there. You see it comes out very slightly, pushes it out, and then up top there's another one of these tabs. Just push it and out comes the RAM. So this blue metal on it is really just to make it look cool. Really what's going on is, the only thing that really matters is this green internal aspect of it, the circuit board. So normal circuit board is underneath here. You can see this is DDR3 memory, and this one's 8 gigabytes. Each of these are 8 gigabytes, and there's 2 of them. Remember what I said, there's always a pair of these. And so you can see the notch on the DDR3 memory is a little bit more offset than the DDR2, because having it offset more makes it easier to figure out where the notch is and put it in the right direction. So let's look back here at the female side of the connector, which is right here. It's easier to see the notch, which is right up here somewhere. So you can see the notch is right here, right above my finger there. And so I line up the notch and just wait to hear that click sound, and it's good and snug in there. So memory really is very easy to install. It's probably the easiest thing to install. So upgrading your memory can really make a big difference. Not that expensive. I think these two together, the 16 gigs of memory, cost 70 or 80 bucks. So it's really not that expensive, and it's a great investment. And again, to bring it back to the cooking metaphor, this is like going from 8 gigs to 32 gigs is, 8 gigs to 16 gigs is like doubling the amount of counter space you have. So it just allows you to do a lot more, not have to worry about stuff loading, and it's just nice to have. So your computer will just zip along a lot faster. So that's it for RAM. Laptops have RAM that's smaller than this, so laptop RAM is going to be a different size, different dimensions, but it always goes in order of size. So 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabytes, 4, 8, 16, 32. Sometimes you see stuff like 6 gigs, which is a lot of times 2 pairs of 3, but for the most part, you just want to go 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and figure out, for the amount of money you're spending, what's the best ratio of how many gigabytes are you getting per dollar, or how many dollars does it cost to get extra gigabytes, and where is the market, where's that kind of sweet spot in the marketplace right now. So not too complicated, and it can do a lot to make your experience with your computer better. If I was to say just one thing, that would probably be it. It's kind of like a kitchen. It's like, what's the one thing that would make it easier to create big meals, big exciting meals? Well, have more temporary space. So that's a combination of your counter space, but it's also, if you've ever had a mini fridge, or you have a half fridge, half freezer, it can be, it gets full really quickly and you don't have enough space anymore. So it's just having that extra space, short-term space to put stuff. You no longer have that overcrowded feeling. You no longer feel overwhelmed by all the stuff going on. Same exact thing with your computer. So RAM, memory, really important, and one of the best, easiest, and first things to go for when you're thinking about how to get your computer to go a little bit faster. In this video, we're going to talk about graphics cards. Graphics cards is what powers your display. Some motherboards have graphics built in, a small graphics built in, which usually will mean like a HDMI connector or just a VGA connector, maybe just a DVI, but that's not as common. But for most computers, you're going to want to have your own graphics card. If you're gaming, you're going to want to have a big graphics card. Otherwise, you don't need something that intense for graphics. So what I'm going to do is take the camera handheld again and show you what the graphics card looks like, how it works. And the graphics card is really in charge of the appearance. So in a kitchen and in culinary schools, they teach you that people eat with their eyes first and then they eat with their stomachs. So it's really, depending on what you're doing, appearance is going to be more important or less important. So if you're doing gaming, if you're doing certain stuff with video editing or photo editing, you're going to want to have a better graphics card. If you're going to have multiple displays, it's going to be really important to have a good graphics card. But for most of just like an office computer, you're not going to, you can either use the built-in graphics or you can get a really cheap graphics card just so you can do stuff like use 2 monitors instead of 1 monitor. And having 2 monitors is one of the best things you can do to increase your productivity. It's just amazing the benefits that you get from using a second monitor. So I'm going to take the camera handheld and we'll take a look at this graphics card. So this right here is the graphics card. From the outside, you see the connectors, and there's 3 connectors. There's VGA, which is usually blue, HDMI, which usually doesn't have a color, and DVI, which is usually white, but they just decided to make it black here. So these are the 3 connectors, and the way I use this is one display is powered by HDMI, the other by DVI. VGA is an older connector. It's analog instead of digital, but it has all 3. So that's the top of the graphics card right there. And you can see these mounts right here. You can see 4 mounting screws right here, right here, right here, and right here. That tells you that this is the part of the graphics card where the processing unit is. And that's where it's going to heat up the most, because those mounting screws allow you to would allow you to potentially add cooling to it. Most graphics cards are going to have a fan already included, and those mounting screws for this particular one are actually just for the fins right here. The reason why I pointed it out is I want you to see the commonality between the mounting screws, the 4 mounting screws right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the GPU. So it's all about mounting things so that you can cool down the area that's going to be. So for this graphics card, you wouldn't mount anything onto those 4 screws, because those are mounts for this set of black fins right here. So you can see the fins right here. This is the graphics card. This cable right here is for the VGA. So it connects to the circuit board right here, and then you come around and there's the VGA right here. So that's the graphics card, and it goes into this connector, this shape connector right here. So you can see it has that notch right there, and that notch ensures that you only put it in the right direction. So the great thing about this case is it's a toolless case, so I can just unscrew this with my finger, And I can pull out this graphics card and show you exactly what it looks like. So there's the screw right there, toolless design. And then I just, you'll see right here, there's a little locking mechanism that keeps it in or allows you to pull it out. So first, I'm going to see if there's a mechanism like that. You can see it's right here. And then I'm just going to gently try to pull this graphics card out. So you see it has the same sort of latch. So this is a low-end graphics card. So if you're not doing anything special, I think this was about 40 bucks. You can see the little connectors for the 3 different types. There's the DVI right here. Here's the HDMI right here with my thumb. Here's the VGA. Big heat sink right there. And then there's all the different stuff going on. So when you're putting it in, you look at these golden connectors, and then you just line it up with where you're plugging it in. So we're plugging it in right here. So I'm going to line it up. And then once I have it lined up, I line it up right here also, this edge. And just work it in there. So slowly push down. And once it's snug in there, take the little thumb screw and get that. I usually am not doing this with one hand, so it's a little bit anyways, I'll screw that in. So on a more expensive graphics card, on a graphics card for a gaming rig, you would have a fan right here. And I actually have I have another graphics card that I used for another computer that had a fan here. So it would just have a little fan circling around like that. And that would keep the graphics card cool. So sometimes you'll have 2 graphics cards in a computer, and they'll connect together and it'll give you more power. So if you want faster frame rates, or if you want more than one screen, the way it works is you'd have another graphics card in this port. So there'd be one here and one here, and then you'd have a thing that linked them together. And you'll see that in a lot of gaming rigs. There's some that even will have 3 graphics cards. That's pretty rare, but you'll see it every once in a while. So that's it for graphics cards. That's all about driving the appearance and making things look good. And especially for gaming, that's a huge piece of it, is getting that frame rate up so that the motion looks really smooth. But that's your graphics card right there in a nutshell. Let's take a quick look at another computer. This is the original video editing rig that I built many years ago. And I want to give you a contrast between this and the other case that we were looking at. This one's a bit smaller. The main thing I want to do is walk you through some of the components inside here, and also just show you what an older computer looks like. A computer that's been through a bit, and also one that hasn't been cleaned in a while. So as I'm transferring things over and putting together this new computer, that's part of what inspired me to create this course, and I want to show you what this computer looks like. I'm about to clean it. I'll actually show you what I use to clean it. It's just one of those air canisters, pressurized air. But first I want to show you what it looks like inside the case. Get the focus there for you. So you can see a lot of dust. Down here's the power. Look at all that dust down there. Especially down in there, a lot of dust. You can see there's dust on these expansion cards here on top. I'll grab the air canister real quick and just show you what kind of effect it has. So this is the air canister right here, and just notice the difference. There's a good spot right there between before and after. So this thing's really great for getting rid of dust. And then after you do that, you take a damp cloth, not too wet, and then you just go through and you really clean everything off. You want to make sure you do this outside if you can, because you get a lot of dust and it can get inside your airstream and cause a lot of coughing and stuff like that. Let's do a quick tour of this case as well. So on the inside, really quick, you've got your RAM right here. You've got some SATA ports, which are for your hard drives right here and right here. You've got the CPU and the heatsink. This is the heatsink, and underneath this is the CPU. And then these cards, you have an Ethernet card. You have a graphics card right here, and then you have a SATA card right here to add additional hard drives. Remember, this was for a video editing rig, so having a lot of hard drives is really important. This is the main power cable that gives power to the motherboard. Let's turn it around to the back and you'll actually get to see the extension slots and the input-output. So down there you have your audio, then you have Ethernet, USB, you have an eSATA port, that's for a fast connection for a hard drive. Keep on going up, got another Ethernet port, which you usually don't see that, 2 Ethernet ports on a motherboard. More USB, more USB, and then one PS2 connector that you could use for either one. Then your fan. And then down here, there's that networking card. This is the graphics card. And these are 2 eSATA ports. So this has 2 eSATA ports, which are for external hard drives. It's going to be much faster than a regular USB 2. And just to show you the dust levels, look it down. This is the back of the case. You can see there's these zip tie looking things that you can use to tie off cables, and you have this thin space right here, and the cover goes on top of it. So this allows you to route cables behind this so that the front looks nicer. So just check out for example, the amount of dust that accumulated on that wire, that power cable that hadn't been used. And down here in the bottom of the case, I'm not sure how much of the dust you can see, but pretty dusty back there. So these are where all the power cables are coming out of the power box down here. 750, that big number, whether it's 650, 550, 750, 1000, that's just how many watts power you're going to get out of that power supply. So you can see this case here isn't too much different from the other one we looked at. I'll quickly show you the front of it also. This is the front. It's got these ports. So you've got a FireWire, 2 USB, microphone jack, a headphone jack, and then a lock. So you can lock it, and then this opens up. You have a zip, not a floppy drive right there, which you barely ever have to use. And then up here is where you put in your 5 1/4 inch. That's where you put in your 5 1/4 inch drives. I'm going to grab a drive to show you what that looks like. Alright, so right here we're looking at a 5 1/4 inch, which is the standard size for all these optical drives. See right there, your DVD drive. So that just slides right in here, and you can put up to 4 of them in there. They're not always that size though. They don't have to be that size. This is actually an external DVD drive. So this is something that just plugs in via USB. So you can see they're not exactly the same size, same width, but they're pretty close. So these optical drives, you don't need them as much anymore. They have the same connectors as a hard drive on the back. You've got your power. The power is the wide one, and then the data is the thinner one right here. So when you buy it, depending on your case, you have to put these rails on. You see those 2 screws? That rail allows it to slide into these slots right here, right here, right here. So that allows you to slide it in and out really easily, and then you just connect it to the motherboard and you're good to go. So actually there is one other thing I want to show you, which is right down here. See those 2 rubber holes right there? These are called grommets, and the reason for these 2 holes is if you're doing liquid cooling. So if you're doing liquid cooling, you have one going through there, one going through there, and that cycles water going in, cools the CPU up here, and then the warm water comes back out. So that's really all there is to this case. It's a nice case, a big case, but I wanted to upgrade everything. So we'll get more into the details of these various components in the future videos. Now let's talk about cooling. How do you cool your computer? So the basic one that you probably already know about is fans. So you can see a fan right here. And this computer has a lot of different places where you can have a fan. There's 2 areas up here. You can have a fan here and a fan here. You also have this thing. This is a heat sink. We'll talk about that in a second. There's also a fan down here near the bottom of the computer. Right there. There's another fan. And then there's also fan slots that you can put at the front of the computer. So I'll open up the front of the computer and you can see that also. So there's 2 additional places where you can put fans. And this thing collects the dust so that you can clean those out. And it keeps the dust from going into your room, your office, or whatever. So the most interesting thing about cooling is cooling the CPU, but there's also some other stuff going on the motherboard. So anytime you see fins like this, see those fins thin, see some more fins up here. There's some fins right here on the bottom of the graphics card. So you're going to see anywhere where it's likely to get hot, you're going to see fins. This is the biggest one though, is this heat sink that's on the CPU. So that's just a huge set of fins right there, and that's mounted directly on top of the CPU. So what I'm going to do in this video is show you what the actual CPU looks like without this cooler on it. And this thing is just mounted on top. So I'm going to go right here. If you see this latch, right here, that black latch right here, this black latch right here, get you focused on that. I'm going to pull this up, and this is going to unlatch it. And there's different sort of mounting setups depending on whether you're using an Intel or an AMD processor. So you just lift that up. It's going to be on there pretty snug. Once that loosens up, it's not too tough to get off. It's in there pretty snug. So I might have to cut this video and come back in a sec. I'm actually going to put the computer on its back. So you can see the heatsink better right there. And can unlatch it. So here's the heatsink right here. That's the latch. That little square piece latches on to this black piece right here of plastic. So when that latch comes off, it's very easy to just take this whole thing off. So that's the heatsink right there. Got some copper on it. And then there's the CPU. So it's a completely flat surface, and usually this will have a material on it, and the material will, it's called, the best one in the industry is called Arctic Silver, and it just helps heat transfer between the CPU and this surface right here a lot better. You can see that's a completely flat surface, and it's been ground down, so it's complete, where these two metals meet, it's a completely flat surface. So you put that compound on there, that heat transfer compound, and you're good to go. So I'm going handheld for a second so I can really show you how this thing's connected here. I just unlatched the heatsink, and you can see that flat square right there connects to that square down there. That square down there is the CPU. That's like the little chef inside the kitchen. If you're wondering what it actually looks like, you just pull it out, and it's got all these pins on it. And you'll notice on here there's some missing pinholes, and those match up with these so that it goes in easily. So we'll talk more about that in the CPU video. But basically, you put a special compound on here, and it helps heat transfer better to this heatsink. Then the heat goes all up into these thin, these fins, these metal fins, and then air goes through the fins, and that cools the fins down. So, so you have a fan like that, and that air goes through this. So maybe wondering, what's this piece right here? Well, this is the mount. So this is the mounting bracket right here, and I can tell you this is pretty annoying to have to install, this mounting bracket right here. But it latches on to these two black things right here. So one end latches on to that nub coming out right there, and the other latches onto this nub, this thing right here. And that's what keeps it attached to the motherboard. So this mounting right here system is for an AMD processor. Mounts on right like that. So it mounts on, that end goes onto that nub, that end right there goes on to that nub right there. So that's how, you see there's another set of fins. That's how, here's another set of fins right there. So the way your computer's cooling itself down is by dispersing that heat, and then allowing air to flow through there. And that cool air cools down the fins, and so that cools down what's underneath the fins. So in most computers, you're never going to see what's underneath these fins. That's why I wanted to take this off so you could really see what was going on and how this works. this is how most CPUs are cooled. If you want to overclock it, which means run it faster, it's going to heat up. It's like, and we'll get more into this in the CPU section, but it's like overworking. It's like a chef trying to move at double speed because they've got a huge set of orders coming in. So we'll talk about that in the next video on processors, CPUs. This lecture is about mice and keyboards, and people usually assume it doesn't matter what mouse you use, doesn't matter what keyboard you use, and I've really found the opposite. Getting the right keyboard and the right mouse can make a huge difference. And same thing with the display. It's one of the major things that helps you improve your productivity. So in the kitchen, there's certain things that you're using all the time. You're using your chef's knife all the time. And so that's something that's worth investing in. If you're going to be using that every day, 250, 300 days a year, then that's something worth investing $100, $200 in, because that's a tool you're going to be using 10 times more than almost any other tool. So same thing with your keyboard and your mouse. Really make sure that the things that you're going to be using the most often, those are the things that you invest most heavily in. And a lot of people just don't think about their equipment that way. So really think about how much time you're investing and really using it. And that's where mice and keyboard come into play, because you can get a mouse and keyboard, you can switch computers and still use the same mouse, same keyboard. I've got the same wireless keyboard that I've been using for it's probably 6 or 7 years by now, and it's just a really, really great keyboard. And I don't want to switch. I don't want to use a new one. Now, what I will tell you is there's really two things I recommend for mice. With any desktop mouse, you're going to get probably a wired mouse. And what I recommend is you get something that's contoured for your hand. I've been using Logitech for almost everything that I buy in terms of keyboard and mice and webcams. So I would go with, and I'll include a link after this video with the specific mice and keyboard that I use. The keyboard is just a flat wireless keyboard, and the old mouse I used was a wireless mouse that had a few extra buttons on it, and it had a click wheel that you could click it down and it would spin freely, and then you could click it again and it would have that click 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 motion to it. And so I used that for several years and was happy with it. And then I was looking for an edge. I was looking for how could I become more productive with my mouse, because I feel like there's all these fingers here, and in video games you're using your fingers a lot more and your hand a lot more than what you're doing with a mouse. So I started to think, well, is there something here? And I looked up gaming mice, and I found that there's mice that are usually used by people who play massively multiplayer online games, something I've never really been into, but they have mice that have where the thumb goes, it has a bunch of extra buttons. And so I did a ton of research on gaming mice. And the thing about gaming is it's all about speed. And so all the gaming mice out there, basically, the ones that have the most buttons especially, is they're all wired. And so for a long time I thought, I've been using wireless for so long, will I ever be able to go back? And I can tell you it's been really easy to go back to wired. I haven't had any issues with it. I understand if you have a laptop, yeah, it could be a bit more of an issue, but as long as it's got a long cord, you're not going to have any problems. And I really like this mouse. It's got 12 buttons just right here, a 4x3 grid of buttons, and it's got a few extra buttons on the other parts of it. It's got 3 push down buttons up top, so like your left click, your middle click, and your right click, and it's super powerful. So I highly recommend you check out the one that I use. I'll include that in the link, and I'll give you an example. So in Premiere Pro, which is video editing software, I have a bunch of buttons set up so I can go forward a frame, back a frame, slow-mo, play, pause, cut the video, switch between various video editing tools. And they make keyboards, special keyboards that have colors on them and stuff, so you know where all the shortcuts are. But I like having it on the mouse. And so like I have another mode on the mouse where it's got shortcuts for cut, copy, paste, print, dim my screen or brighten my screen, print screen, escape. Just the functions that you use most often, you just program them in, and it makes especially web browsing easier. You don't have to use your left hand to find the keyboard shortcut, accidentally press the wrong one, and I really love it. So I highly recommend you do that. For some reason, nobody in the productivity area has really bumped into this thing, but the gaming, it's just another example of what I talk about in my creativity course, about how creativity is really just taking something from one domain and bringing it into a domain where it's not used yet. So gaming is one domain where they've really optimized the human-computer interface because it's about performance and it's competition, and anything that's highly competitive, there's going to be constant innovation. But with stuff like office skills, where there's no competition or very little, there's no incentive for people to improve their human-computer interface. So except for specialized domains like video editors or 3D modeling, where they do have these specialized setups, most people are just using the same old mouse and keyboard that's been around for decades. So I highly recommend you check out this stuff. I'll include it as some text links in the lecture after this one. One other thing I want to touch on real briefly is displays, and I highly recommend you go out and get 2 displays for your desktop system, or if it's a laptop, get at least an extra display. When you're choosing a laptop, look for laptops that have high resolution. This is one of the biggest things that people don't realize, is you get so much more done if you have high resolution. And the great thing about it is if you have a 1080p or larger widescreen laptop, it allows you to put 2 windows side by side and have them basically full width and be able to do things side by side. So you have a spreadsheet on one side, a document on the other side. You have 2 different components that you're comparing that you want to buy. Email on one side, work stuff on the other side. Just highly recommend doing that. And then for when you set up your desk, whether it's a desktop tower or a laptop, I highly recommend you get 2 24-inch displays, have them side by side. It's just huge for productivity. You get a lot more done. It's been shown through studies to be the #1 thing you can do to improve your productivity is just get another display. So I highly recommend you get another display. You don't need any sort of fancy. You can go get the cheapest graphics card on the market for like 20, 30, 40 bucks, and it's going to support 2 displays. So all you need to do is really make sure that the displays you're using have the right connectors. And if you're going to be doing graphics work, like video stuff, Photoshop stuff, make sure you invest money in a display that is color accurate. A lot of displays don't have great color accuracy. So when I got into video editing and I was building that video editing computer, I spent a lot more money than I otherwise would, probably around $300 to get a really nice display that had really good color accuracy. But my second display, I didn't need that. So the other display I just got it used off Craigslist for probably around $100. So you don't have to spend a lot of money. You just have to know what you're using it for and what's the bare minimum you need for that, and then what are the best places to buy the components, whether new or used, based on what you need for what you're doing.